Hello, I'm Tootight Lautrec. Welcome. Welcome. Welcome to my opening. Hello, I am Tootight Lautrec. Welcome to my opening, where I serve as your very own personal shopper for literary fiction by reading opening passages of books I recommend for one reason or another. We're here in our new little hovel in an undisclosed location, somewhere beyond the legal limits of the sub basement in PS 75, the Emily Dickinson School, as specified by the restraining order. If you happen to hear beeping and booping, honking and shouting as we go along, just try to ignore it as best you can and chalk it up as one more musical moment of hiding out in the big city. Likewise, ignore the sounds of sirens, as they probably, almost certainly, let's hope, have nothing to do with moi. Let's get started. Say you're doing your civic duty and sauntering through the aisles of your local bookstore, in a mood for a good read, but you don't know exactly what kind of a good read. And you happen upon this, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Perhaps you don't really know much about Sylvia Plath, and you think, oh, she's the sad one. And you set the book down and walk on. Here's where I say, stop. Stop right there. You'd be making a big mistake. You'd be making a big mistake ignoring the bell jar. Yes, she was the sad one, but that is only one facet of the prism of her personality and talents. Sylvia Plath was primarily a poet, and yes, she did suffer from depression, and yes, she did commit suicide at the very young age of 30. If you look only at her angry, defiant poems, or her poems that deal honestly, acutely, intelligently with her mental travails, you might get the wrong impression. If you read all of her work, you'll find her biting wit, her joy in experience, and her love of language. Plath had a pronounced humor that shouldn't be overlooked, and The Bell Jar is no exception in this regard. She had a wicked, if sometimes perhaps morbid, sense of humor that carries you through the difficulties her narrator describes in The Bell Jar. The Bell Jar is a somewhat autobiographical novel, a roman à clef, and as such, Plath didn't want her name attached to it when it was first published, because she didn't want to upset her mother. She wanted to spare her the pain it might cause. Later, when it was revealed that Plath was in fact the writer of The Bell Jar, one woman who had been among the many young women that interned at the New York magazine depicted in the novel, along with Plath, actually blamed The Bell Jar for her divorce. As it turned out, her husband learned some things he hadn't known before. The first edition of The Bell Jar was published under the pseudonym Victoria Lucas in London by William Henneman in 1963. It was not published under Plath's name until 1967, and it wasn't published in the US until 1971. Originally written under the sponsorship of a fellowship from Harper and Row, they withdrew the fellowship after seeing the manuscript, calling it disappointing, juvenile, and overwrought. When it was finally published, it received what could honestly be called warily positive reviews. The New York Times praised its sharp and uncanny descriptions, and the New Yorker praised its black comedy. Sylvia Plath ended her own life February 11th, 1963, 1 month after The Bell Jar was first published. Now, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. It was a queer, sultry summer, the summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York. I'm stupid about executions. The idea of being electrocuted makes me sick, and all there was to read about in the papers, goggle-eyed headlines staring up at me on every street corner, and at the fusty, peanut-smelling mouth of every subway. It had nothing to do with me, but I couldn't help wondering what it would be like being burned alive all along your nerves. I thought it must be the worst thing in the world. New York was bad enough. By 9 in the morning, the fake country wet freshness that somehow seeped in overnight evaporated like the tail end of a sweet dream. Mirage gray at the bottom of their granite canyons, the hot streets wavered in the sun. The car tops sizzled and glittered, and the dry, cindery dust blew into my eyes and down my throat. I kept hearing about the Rosenbergs over the radio and at the office till I couldn't get them out of my mind. It was like the first time I saw a cadaver. For weeks afterward, the cadaver's head, or what there was left of it, floated up behind my eggs and bacon at breakfast, and behind the face of Buddy Willard, who was responsible for my seeing it in the first place. And pretty soon I felt as though I were carrying that cadaver's head around with me on a string, like some black, noseless balloon, stinking of vinegar. I knew something was wrong with me that summer, because all I could think about was the Rosenbergs and how stupid I'd been to buy all those uncomfortable, expensive clothes, hanging limp as fish in my closet, and how all the little successes I'd totted up so happily at college fizzled to nothing outside the slick marble and plate glass fronts along Madison Avenue. I was supposed to be having the time of my life. I was supposed to be the envy of thousands of other college girls just like me all over America, who wanted nothing more than to be tripping about in those same size 7 patent leather shoes I'd bought in Bloomingdale's one lunch hour, with a black patent leather belt and black patent leather pocketbook to match. And when my picture came out in the magazine the 12 of us were working on, drinking martinis in a skimpy imitation silver lame bodice stuck onto a big fat cloud of white tulle on some starlight roof, in the company of several anonymous young men with all-American bone structures hired or loaned for the occasion, everybody would think I must be having a real whirl. Look what can happen in this country, they'd say. A girl lives in some out-of-the-way town for 19 years, so poor she can't afford a magazine, and then she gets a scholarship to college, and wins a prize here and a prize there, and ends up steering New York like her own private car. Only I wasn't steering anything, not even myself. I just bumped from my hotel to work and to parties, and from parties to my hotel, and back to work like a numb trolley bus. I guess I should have been excited, the way most of the other girls were, but I couldn't get myself to react. I felt very still and very empty, the way the eye of a tornado must feel, moving dully along in the middle of the surrounding hullabaloo. So that's the opening of The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. If you'd like to read more, go out, support your local bookstore, pick up a copy for yourself. Join me again for my openings, and we'll find out what's good to read. In the meantime, subscribe, share, and like the video. Do the hokey pokey and twirl yourself about, because really, isn't that what it's all about? No, it's not. What it's all about is paying attention to the world, because it's full of wonder. Until next time, I'm Tootight Lautrec. Mwah.